Right, so welcome, folks. This is the May 1st program. Glad that everybody is here. Last week I had some technical problems because I wanted to play some video, so that's why I ended up canceling the program and there's no program. And I normally put out a newsletter to let you know, but I was I was very busy, let's just say this last week. So but all is well. So now also just to let you know, there will be no program next week. I am doing something I have wanted to do for years, and I finally was able to make the arrangements to get it done. I am traveling to Scotland. Yes, I'm going to Scotland next week. Actually, I'm leaving on Friday. What I've been wanting to do is I've been wanting to go back and do some of the history of my family genealogy. My four times grandfather moved to and came to the United States in 1712 from Scotland. And I have my family history back to where he was born in this little village called Kilbarchan, which is about, maybe 12 miles or so southwest of Glasgow. So I fly to London on Friday, arrive on Saturday, take the train from London up to Glasgow, and I'm going to spend 3 days there and just doing some touring there. Then I'm also going to do a little bit of another side trip as well. If you have seen the movie The Da Vinci Code, at the very end of the movie, they end up at the chapel in Roslyn, the Roslyn Chapel. And that's only about 20 to 25 miles away. So I'm going to go visit the Roslyn Chapel as well. So that's what I'll be doing next week. So I will be on the road for a personal trip of wanting to do some family genealogy that is there. So I won't be able to do that. Now, having said that, if you're going to send me any emails, I'm going to have maybe 2 to 3 days in there. I'm not going to be able to respond because, flight times, I have to fly from Phoenix, to Los Angeles, have a 2 hour layover, and then Los Angeles to London. And that total time is going to be about 14 to 16 hours. And then I get in and I have to make the arrangements. And the train trip up to Glasgow is another 5 hours. Then it's going to take me an hour or two to get over to my hotel. So there may be a day or two in there I'm not going to be able to do any respond to any emails. So I just wanted to let you know. But now, this week's program. Last week I was going to do a program about the importance of perception and how important it is to understand how that impacts what's coming up in our lives, in our world. But this week I came across a program, an economic program, that is just absolutely outstanding, that's going to let you see what's projected to be upcoming in the economy for us here in the United States. I have been saying on past programs, it's very important that if you have what is called discretionary money in bank accounts, to get it out of the bank, because there was a high probability we may be starting to see a lot more bank failures or bank downturns. Well, this program by Stansberry Research Group, they are absolutely excellent. I've been listening to them for years. I subscribe to them. And this program was just so absolutely outstanding. And Dan Ferris is the name of the gentleman. And now in this program, normally the whole video goes about 58 minutes, just under an hour. I didn't want to play a 58-minute video. So I edited it down to around 34 minutes that we're going to listen to Dan Ferris talk about what's coming up in the bank problems, the economic downturn, the importance of securing your funds and stuff like that. But what I will do is that, in next day, like tomorrow, I always send out the program as an edited video, and I will then give you the link to the full program if you want to listen to his full 1 hour program. But tonight we're just going to see an edited version of it. So let me see where I am here. I got to find my program. So let's go and let's do this here. And this should be coming through.
My name is Dan Ferris. I'm an analyst at one of America's largest independent financial research firms. If you have any money stashed away in a U.S. savings account, an IRA, a 401k right now, I urge you to pay close attention to what I'm about to show you. As you know, last year we witnessed the collapse of 3 regional banks. It sent shockwaves throughout the financial markets. But what you may not realize is that those 3 bank failures were larger than the 25 that collapsed during the financial crisis combined. And while these bank collapses quickly disappeared from the news as the government bailed out regional banks across the country, none of the fundamental problems that caused last year's bank run have gone away today. Last year alone, U.S. banks lost over $1 trillion in deposits, the biggest outflow we've ever seen in history. They also laid off almost 62,000 employees, the highest number since the financial crisis, and shuttered more than 1,500 bank branches in 2023 alone. In fact, the fundamental forces squeezing banks today are only getting worse. Today, as many as 722 banks across the country have seen their portfolios of U.S. Treasury bonds crash by as much as 50% from their peak. And I'm just talking about the so-called safe investments that our banks are required to hold as collateral. Bank of America alone has already lost $131 billion in deposits, while Wells Fargo and JP Morgan Chase have lost nearly $40 billion in deposits each. Together with over 700 other banks, these losses are now worth at least $680 billion. Although some experts estimate this number is as high as $1.3 trillion, more than half of the total equity in our entire banking system. In other words, if Americans were to go and try to get all their money out of banks today, our entire banking system would collapse. And I believe that as soon as May 1st, our government will make an unprecedented move that they'll say will save the economy from this current banking crisis. A policy change that will permanently alter the US dollar and ultimately make Americans much, much poorer as a result. I know this might sound hard to believe. Nobody wanted to believe me back in 2008 when I predicted the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the 4th largest investment bank in America at the time. But 5 months later, shares had fallen over 80% and the company went bankrupt. Today, my research has led me to a similar conclusion. Only the scale of the problem today is many times worse than anything I witnessed during the financial crisis. My friend, hedge fund manager Hugh Hendry, renowned for achieving a 31% positive return at the height of the financial crisis, recently told Bloomberg, "We're at the point where the Fed and the Treasury officials are having to consider desperate measures to protect our bank deposits." As I'm sure you've experienced in the past, when the government takes drastic measures to save the economy, it doesn't usually work out like they say it will, at least not for people like you and me. The problems in our banking system today have only reached these levels 2 other times in the last 90 years. And in both instances, the President of the United States issued an executive order that fundamentally changed our money, our economy, and our way of life, leaving millions of Americans poorer virtually overnight. I call these kinds of executive orders Trojan horses, because while they are designed to seem like solutions to the crisis, they are always radical monetary experiments that end up destroying American savings instead. And Biden's Trojan horse will be no different. In fact, our president laid the groundwork for this Trojan horse when he inked Executive Order 14067. It's one of the 127 executive orders he's signed since taking office, which may be why so few people have paid attention. But you should be paying attention. Today, I want to show you exactly how our country got into this mess and why I believe May 1st will be a turning point for our country. For the first time, you'll clearly understand why it feels like hope has disappeared for the vast majority of Americans. You'll begin to understand why the country has never been more divided politically and economically, and you'll be able to clearly see how history can show us exactly what to expect next. As our government attempts the most radical experiment with our money, our currency, and our economy in history. I'll show you 3 simple ways to position yourself to survive and even grow your wealth before Biden's Trojan horse fundamentally alters the value of your savings forever. It's a lot to take in, I know, but you can check every number I'm sharing with you today. Once this message is finished, you can check all my sources by going to our Details and Disclosures page linked below. So why am I telling you all this? We've seen stunning parallels to the Great Depression in recent years. And just like in 1933, the government has a Trojan horse they'll claim is our only option. It's all spelled out in Executive Order 14067, a proposal that lays out the blueprint for an overhaul of our financial system, one that will likely result in the massive devaluation of our currency and destroy the fundamental fabric of commerce and our economy. As with any government scheme, there are always those who will be left holding the bag and those who will come out on top. I'm going to show you 3 strategies that I expect will benefit you greatly as this banking crisis enters a new phase. But first, you have to know that FDR wasn't the only president who pulled off a heist like this during a time of crisis. The same thing happened again just 37 years later, when America was torn apart by the Vietnam War, protests, and the aftermath of assassinations of both Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy. Economically, we were in another recession. And 2 years after Nixon took office, our unemployment rate almost doubled. Inflation was running at nearly 6%. That's enough to cut the value of your money in half within 12 years, not unlike what we've seen recently. And it was no secret why. FDR's New Deal and 3 decades of similar policies were driving the country into debt as our leaders dipped into our gold reserves to finance their spending. By 1971, our gold reserves had plummeted by more than 50%. In fact, our national debt nearly doubled within the span of the Vietnam War alone. By 1971, we owed other central banks nearly 4 times more money than we kept in gold reserves. And remember, this money was still legally convertible to gold at $35 an ounce. Foreign governments that owned U.S. treasuries got worried, much like they did during the recent debt ceiling crisis we saw in 2023. And it was no surprise in 1971 when several countries began demanding payment on America's debt in gold at an alarming rate. This time, it was our central bank that was the target of the bank run. In fact, foreign banks withdrew $4 billion of the $10 billion in gold reserves at Fort Knox within a single week. So, President Nixon gathered his advisors for a secret meeting at Camp David to formulate a plan to save America. On August 15, 1971, after just 2 days of discussion, Nixon announced his executive decision to sever America's long-standing commitment to the gold standard forever. You'd think Americans would have protested. But we didn't. We rewarded Nixon instead. A day later, the stock market jumped 32 points. It was the largest one-day jump at the time. Over the following week, White House aides talked to people all over the country and encountered enthusiasm bordering on euphoria. As one pollster said, "In all the years I've been doing this business, I've never seen anything this unanimous, unless maybe it was the reaction to Pearl Harbor." White House Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman wrote that Nixon was obsessed with domestic and international reactions. He craved credit for being an extraordinary leader, and he got it. Americans praised Nixon for saving the economy. Only they couldn't have foreseen what it would do to their money, jobs, and cost of living when the economy entered a severe recession just 2 years later. And that's when troubled banks began to collapse, reaching a peak in 1976 with 16 failures, the most bank failures we'd seen since 1942. We also saw one of the worst inflationary crises of American financial history, a period we now call the Great Inflation. By 1980, the inflation rate hit 14%. It was the kind of inflation that could decimate the value of your savings in just 5 years. That was until Paul Volcker became the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Volcker famously raised interest rates up to a peak of 20% to get inflation under control. And to this day, he's widely credited with ending the Great Inflation. But it's ironic that Volcker became so famous for this feat. You see, he was in the room at Camp David when Nixon decided to untether the dollar from gold. Volcker later regretted it and said, "I learned a good lesson about what masterful politicians do." You might think this could never happen in America today, but the exact same pattern is playing out right now with Executive Order 14067. All it takes is one crisis, one president, and one decision to change your money forever. Like FDR, Nixon's Trojan horse had an added benefit of ensuring his reelection. And just like with FDR, the people cheered Nixon on while our currency was altered forever. But in practice, Nixon created an even bolder and more sinister change to our money than FDR did. You see, when FDR confiscated our gold and devalued our currency by 41% overnight, the dollar was still backed by gold, just less of it. But Nixon ripped us off the gold standard completely and ushered in a new era of fiat money, leaving the dollar backed by nothing except our full faith and trust in the US government. This created a new way for the government to spend money it didn't have endlessly, with no limit in sight. Unsurprisingly, the US dollar lost 90% of its value priced in gold in the next 10 years following Nixon's decision. And we're still paying the price of the Nixon shock today. This decision, more than any other, has been responsible for so many of the problems we talk about in America today. Just consider this chart, which compares our productivity to our wages. For decades, the two were interlocked, moving in parallel. As Americans got more efficient and more productive, they made more money for their efforts. But as you can see, something changed in the early 70s, and these lines haven't moved together ever since. If you've ever wondered why income inequality seems worse than it should be in our country, if you feel like people didn't have to worry about these kinds of financial problems in the past, you are right. Sound currencies keep inflation and rising living costs in check. Since the dollar lost its gold backing, we've seen terrible consequences ripple throughout every aspect of our society. Our personal savings rate has fallen drastically since August 1971, from 13% to a mere 3% in 2023. In other words, most Americans are barely treading water. Almost everything you can think of, from incarceration to childhood obesity to divorce numbers to the number of young adults living with their parents, all coincidentally hit an inflection point exactly in 1971. Instead of the American middle class growing and prospering in the decades since the Nixon shock, a Pew Research Center study shows that the middle class has steadily shrunk since 1971. In fact, it is no longer the majority in America. Meanwhile, the wealthiest group of Americans saw their wealth soar 69% since the 70s. Because if you know what assets to buy in periods like this one, it can absolutely change everything for you. For example, American oil and shipping tycoon Daniel K. Ludwig became the country's richest man at the height of the Great Inflation, and America's only remaining billionaire at the time. He turned a $25 investment into a $3 billion empire across several industries, such as finance, oil and gas, and real estate. Legendary investor Warren Buffett, who foresaw the grave consequences of the Great Inflation, also emerged from this crisis a billionaire. And after the Nixon shock, when the stock market plummeted nearly 50% within 20 months, Buffett even managed to grow Berkshire Hathaway's stock by double-digit real returns and beat the S&P 500, making the Great Inflation years some of the billionaire's best investing years, even in a crisis. I'm sharing these stories with you because our country is once again about to face a financial catastrophe of the government's own making. My hope is that once you see what's coming, you can protect yourself, your family, and your wealth from the crisis we're about to face, and even profit with the strategic investments I'll be showing you today. Remember, 2 presidents, 2 crises, and 2 executive decisions changed the course of history and redefined our money forever. And like those two presidents, I believe Joe Biden has laid the groundwork for his solution to our banking crisis. Executive Order 14067, a Trojan horse that will transform our currency and our money forever. But first, you need to know why the consequences of today's crisis will be much worse than what we experienced in 1933 and 1971. Did you know that America still hasn't paid off the debts we incurred since before World War I? Or the wars in Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, and any other from the past 100 years? No, we refinanced them instead. In fact, centuries of debt are still on our books. That's true of all the bad debt from 2008, too. When the government bails out a bank or corporation, we pay for it and take on that bad debt, paid for by our taxes. And that's also true of more than $3 trillion that was printed to prop up the economy at the beginning of the COVID-19 scare. That's 18% of all our money supply at the time, meaning that almost $1 in $5 in America was created in 2020 alone. As a result, we saw the largest flood of federal money into our economy in recorded history. About $5 trillion went to households, mom and pop shops, restaurants, airlines, hospitals, local governments, schools, and other institutions around the country. Of course, few Americans complained about receiving a $1,200 stimulus check at the time. In fact, 70% of Americans told Pew Research they were in favor of the COVID-19 economic relief package. So where did this money go? Well, just like the stock bubble of the 1920s before the Great Depression, the stimulus money was invested in some of the biggest speculative bubbles in our lifetimes, from meme stocks to pot stocks to cryptocurrencies. In fact, the CAPE ratio, which measures how overvalued the stock market is at any given time, has recently reached levels rivaling that of the 1929 crash. And just like in 1929, dire consequences came soon after. Prices for everything, from cars and gasoline to food and clothing, rose at the fastest pace we've seen since the Great Inflation. Inflation catapulted to a record-breaking 40-year high at 9.1%. And when the free government money stopped, so did the bubbles. The Fed, of course, waited too long to act again, insisting that inflation was transitory. But eventually, the problem became too difficult for Americans to ignore. So the Fed raised rates 5 percentage points from nearly zero in just a year, marking the fastest rate hikes we've seen in 40 years. Sure enough, 2022 turned into the worst year for stocks since the great financial crisis in 2008. Just like what we saw in 1933 and 1971, the government's desperate measures to solve the economic crisis caused by the pandemic has only made things worse. With at least 722 banks across America sitting on major unrealized losses right now, losses that are worth up to $1.3 trillion, according to a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Well, what do you think is going to happen when banks no longer have the BTFP program to turn to for bailouts? What is going to happen when their paper losses become realized? The clock is ticking till the Fed shuts it all down at its next meeting on May 1st. That's why it's critical for you to prepare now with the 3 simple steps I'm about to show you. Okay, here's what I mean. In 2022, President Biden quietly signed Executive Order 14067. In it, he wrote about a U.S. central bank digital currency. In non-financial jargon, that means a digital dollar. Well, you might be wondering, isn't the dollar already digital? Technically, the dollars in your bank account represent IOUs from your bank. But as MIT writes, a true digital dollar would be a debt the U.S. government owes you. In other words, your savings would transform into pixels in our country's national computer systems, with its value backed by nothing but our government's word. Now, don't get me wrong, you will still be able to use your money, But there's no telling how far the government could carry this new and unprecedented level of access to one of the most private things in your life, your finances. In other words, with a digital dollar, the Fed could stop you from buying certain foods that they deem unhealthy, or stop you from boarding a flight just because you've exceeded your carbon emissions for the month, or cut you off from your savings and retirement accounts altogether because you're late on a tax payment. The Fed has even gone as far as admit that CBDCs can be used as a form of social control. This isn't something that will happen 5 years or 10 years from today. It is already underway right now. In July 2023, the New York Fed completed a 12-week pilot program for a CBDC where select banks experimented with using digital dollars for transactions and payments. While the Fed launched its long-anticipated instant digital payment system called FedNow, it's available to more than 10,000 financial institutions that operate within the Fed's network. Chances are you're already using this payment system without knowing it. Some financial institutions that have joined the FedNow network report our members don't even know they're using FedNow. While the government says a CBDC will create more stability in the market, well, the reality is just the opposite. The Financial Times recently warned that with FedNow's instant transactions, bank runs could happen faster than ever before. And the brave members of the Cleveland Fed have even spoken out and have warned that FedNow could cause large outflows of deposits and cause a bank run. They have literally already changed our monetary system in a way that makes another major bank run more likely, at a time when the banking industry is more vulnerable to bank runs than ever before. That's why I urge you to protect your savings before the Fed's bank bailouts dry up. I know I keep repeating this, but many banks are currently sitting on 50+% losses in their bond portfolios. As the crisis accelerates, the FedNow system is the Trojan horse that Biden and the Fed will use to supposedly save the economy once again. How? Well, as money manager Hugh Hendry says, we're at the point where the Fed and the Treasury officials are having to consider a gate, a lock on U.S. bank deposits. The Fed may have to come in and actually restrict your right as a U.S. citizen to pull money out of the U.S. banking sector. And the Cleveland Fed revealed in a recent update that in the case of a potential bank run, banks in the FedNow system can already use it to instantly lower your transaction limit, restrict access to your bank account by customer type, change your bank account to receive payments only status. You could wake up one morning with zero access to your hard-earned savings because of this technology. With this kind of power, who knows how long they might hold your money hostage. You might not believe something like this could happen in America, but the truth is, desperate governments around the world have proved time and time again that they're capable of locking their citizens out of their life savings during an economic crisis. We've seen it in Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Panama, and even as recently in 2013 in the European Union with Cyprus. And Executive Order 14067 is designed to allow our government to do the same. Just like in 1933 and 1971, I believe this executive order will change the US dollar forever. When it goes into full effect, starting with the FedNow system they've already launched, you know all too well what kind of disaster will follow for our monetary system and your money. I believe the digital dollar is going to be a disaster for anyone with a bank account, IRA, or 401k. Sure, speculators might spot some chances to earn a buck, but let me be clear, I'm not into that speculative game because right now you have an important decision to make. Are you prepared to trust the government, the Biden administration, and the Federal Reserve? Like the Americans who lost 41% of their savings in 1934 when FDR issued his Gold Reserve Act? Or would you rather take action today and invest your savings in the kind of assets and investments that we know will be much, much more difficult for the government to control?
Okay, that's the end of the program that we have there. Let's see. I want to go ahead and turn that part off. And what that was only part of his whole presentation that he was making. But what I will do, I will send the link that out to that so they can completely see it. And folks, when I did my testing, I didn't go live. I could bring him on and you could see his video. And then when I go live, it doesn't allow me to bring the video in. So I don't know. But anyway, I thought it was extremely important to be able to listen to what Dan Ferris had to say. Now, he did this program about a week ago, so today is May 1st. And what he is saying is today was the day that the Fed shifted and changed and allowed the government to have complete access to our bank accounts by going into a digital currency system. Now, obviously, you're probably not going to see anything right away, but what it does, he says, it changes everything in its basic structure because the money you leave in a bank account is no longer yours. It belongs to the government. They have control over it. And that is why he has said, and I have said as well, if you have discretionary money, get it out of your bank account and put it into a safe place. Now, yes, at the end of the video there, he is bringing out some reports that you can choose to purchase if you want, and he tells you safe places, you know, to where to go. I didn't want to put this into the program tonight, but I do want to allow you to have access to that if that's something that you would choose to do. That's totally up to you. But tonight's program I felt was extremely important so that you can be able to understand and see the potential of what is coming our way, because he said what happened with this access to the digital currency system massively changes what is called money in our country. And he said this is the third time that the government has stepped in, and the value of the money that people have had in their bank accounts has been dramatically changed. So that's what was important here on the program tonight. So now, I think that's pretty much it. I've been going about 40 minutes here on the program tonight. As I said, what I will do is after the program is over, and then I take this and I do a little editing to it, and then I send out a YouTube video that is a product of this program, and in that you will then be able to have the actual video where you can see Dan Ferris speaking what you just heard. So, okay? So I think we're going to leave it with that. I'm not going to take in any live calls tonight. And again, I won't be with you next week. I will be in Scotland visiting my family history places where my great grandfathers were born, and I want to do some more family research on that. So with that, everybody, I want to see here now, how do I where are we at here? I don't know. How do we I don't shut down the live program? That was always one of the funny things that I couldn't quite figure out how to do. So other than the fact that I just turned Facebook off. Okay? All right, folks. Thank you very much. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Okay. Bye.